NHL arbitration hearings for restricted free agents get underway tomorrow, July the 20th, and run through to August the 4th. We still have a fair number of RFAs that have yet to come to terms with their teams on a new contract. In today's video, I'm going to fully explain to you how the arbitration process works and review the hearing schedule so you'll know when to expect a decision on some of your favorite players' contracts. All that's coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top here, we have a lot of RFAs left that have yet to come to terms with their teams on a new contract. We have some fairly significant players that are still in that process trying to negotiate a new deal here with their teams, and the arbitration hearings kick off tomorrow, July the 20th, and run up until August the 4th. Now, of course, all these players are scheduled to have their hearings at different times, and you may or may not know when that is. So I wanted to first fully explain how the arbitration process works so you fully understand everything about it. And then secondly, we're going to go over here the hearing schedule so you'll know when a decision is likely to come for some of your favorite players. Now, of course, between now and the time that these hearings actually get started, teams and players are fully permitted to continue the negotiation process, so we very well may get a fair bit of these players come to terms on new deals before these hearings actually get underway. Obviously, the players that have their hearings coming up earlier in the schedule have less time to accomplish that. So let's jump right in here and get started with explaining how all this is going to work. Now here's a little bit of background on the arbitration process. It first came to be after the 1994-95 lockout. Once they came to terms on a new CBA that was put into place as part of that process to kind of help teams and players come to terms on new deals and have a third-party arbitrator decide them should they run into any difficult cases where they're having trouble coming to an agreement. You can have a player elect to go to salary arbitration, and a team can also elect to take the player to salary arbitration as well. So it can be either one. The more common one here is player elected salary arbitration. We have seen the odd time here in recent years when teams have elected to take the player to the arbitration process. Obviously, you have cases where teams are offering one amount in term, and then you have the player requesting a different amount in term, and sometimes they're just miles apart and have trouble coming to an agreement, which is why this process is put in place to try to bridge the gap and help them come to terms here so that you don't have too many disputes and have it drawn out over too long a period of time. Of course, not all restricted free agents qualify for the arbitration process. In order to qualify, you do have to have 4 years of NHL experience under your belt, unless the only condition with that is that unless you're signed to your first pro contract after the age of 20, then the rules are slightly different. I believe you can get away with a little bit less time than 4 years. Now, a player can only be taken to arbitration one time during their NHL career. So once a team elects to take that player to arbitration, that can be the one and only time that it ends up happening. The other key factor to keep in mind with the arbitration process is that once we end up in that position, once the hearing gets underway, is a player can't receive anything less than 85% of their previous year's salary. So basically think of this as the team and the player basically going to court. You have an arbitrator, which is kind of act like a judge. They hear both sides of the case here, and then they come to a decision on what the new amount should be that that player earns for the following season. So obviously, like I said, teams and players both present their cases. They have a third-party arbitrator listen to both cases, make a decision. Once the hearing gets underway, the negotiation process outside of that stops. And then once the hearing is completed, the arbitrator has to render their decision within 48 hours. So obviously, once we go over the schedule here, you'll know what day some of your favorite players are going to be having their hearings, should they make it to that point. So then you'll know that within 48 hours of that date, so within 2 days later, is when we should expect an announcement from the arbitrator as to what the player was awarded. Now, of course, once that award has been announced, the team can choose to accept it and sign the contract with the player, or in some rare cases, they can choose to say, no, we totally disagree with that, and they can walk away from the player. Now, if that happens, the player becomes a unrestricted free agent. Obviously, once the player becomes a UFA, I would think at that point in time that the relationship between the team and the player is likely going to have some damage, and the odds of that player re-signing with the existing team is likely pretty slim, but they're free to negotiate a new contract for whatever amount in dollar they can come to an agreement with any team, just like any other UFA. Now, that rarely ever happens. I can't think of a case right off the top of my head here where that did happen. So really, if any of these players are players for your favorite teams or some of your favorite players, I really don't think you have anything to worry about, especially with some of these higher profile players. Teams are not just going to walk away and let these guys walk. That's absolutely crazy. The good news with the arbitration process is the short-term deals, so they can start renegotiating new deals here as early as later this year into next season. So with all that being said, keep in mind here, like we said in previous videos, a lot of these players still have time to come to terms with their teams and may not make it to the hearing process. I fully suspect here that this list is going to get whittled down quite substantially before these players have their hearing time. So again, if these are players on your favorite teams or some of your favorite players, I would not be spending any time stressing about it. Deals are likely going to be reached here, and they're not likely going to end up, ended up becoming UFAs and walking away. As I mentioned here, July the 20th, which is tomorrow, which is when these get underway. We get underway quickly with a fairly high-profile player, and that's Jacob Trouba of the Winnipeg Jets. Obviously, that's a very interesting case to see. As I reported in a video yesterday, they do seem to be about $3 million apart in negotiations, which is a major gap. So we'll see what happens. Looks as though the player's asking for around $7 million. The team was offering $4 million, which is obviously a low ball for a player like Trouba. They're going to have to come to an agreement here. I'm not sure exactly where an arbitrator would fall. My guess would be somewhere around 6, maybe 6 or a little bit better. But I guess we'll see on that. But Jacob Trouba is the first one underway. So once these hearings start, as I mentioned, the negotiation process independently come to an end, and then they have their hearing and the arbitrator decides the award. So time is running out for the Jets and Trouba to come to an agreement here on their own. Now on July the 22nd, we have another Winnipeg Jet player, and that's Adam Lowry. He's having his hearing on that day. July the 23rd, we have Matt Dumba as well as Brett Kulak of the Calgary Flames. So obviously Matt Dumba with Minnesota is a fairly high-profile, bigger name that we're interested to see where that goes as well. So obviously he still has a little bit of time, but another very interesting case to keep your eye on. July the 25th, we have St. Louis Blues defenseman Joel Edmonson as well as another Winnipeg Jet, Brandon Tanev. So obviously the Jets have their hands full here. They have a lot of contracts to look after this year as well as next. So we have some very interesting times to see how much the Jets can kind of keep this strong team together moving forward. July the 27th, we have Mark Jankowski of the Calgary Flames. The 28th, we have goaltender David Rittich of Calgary as well as Minnesota forward Jason Zucker. Obviously, Zucker's another guy who's an interesting case to watch. Had an excellent year last year. Certainly was a career high. He's been mentioned in trade rumors. Not really sure why the Wild would want to move him. He is becoming a pretty good goal scorer, but I guess with their payroll and their salary cap situation where it is, I think they're just a little bit concerned over what he may end up getting for a contract. Obviously, it's not so much him, it's just the overall situation. I would think that more likely they would try to move another player before Zucker, but that's just my opinion. If they have to make room here through payroll to get players like him and Dumba under contract. So Minnesota is certainly an interesting team to watch here based on their cap situation and these players that they have here that are going to certainly be getting fairly significant raises. July the 29th, we have Troy Stecher. On July the 30th, we have Marco Dano. On July the 31st, we have Brady Shea of the New York Rangers. Obviously, Brady Shea is a fairly high-end defenseman as well for the Rangers. Be interesting to see where that goes. So obviously, the Rangers are going to want to get a deal done with him. Likely lock him up longer term before this arbitration process kicks in, I would think. On August the 1st, Ottawa defenseman Cody Ceci has his hearing set. He's another interesting case as well. I mean, we know GM Pierre Dorion seems to be pretty high on Ceci, but his play on the ice really hasn't translated to what likely he's looking for a contract. So we'll see here how that one goes. Another interesting case to keep your eye on. On August the 2nd, we have Mikko Salamaki as well as Kevin Hayes of the New York Rangers. Now, speaking of the Rangers and Kevin Hayes, is another player that's been mentioned in trade rumors. It's been rumored by some that the Rangers don't want to have their top two centers between Hayes and Zibanejad, both earning north of $5 million per year with the team going through a rebuild. I'm not really sure why that would be such a problem. Obviously, the Rangers don't have too many issues here right now with the cap. They're in a pretty decent situation. Obviously, the team makes solid money as well. So regardless of what the cap is, their own internal cap is not in any danger. The team does rather well, so I'm not really sure why they'd have such a big issue with that, but I guess we'll keep an eye on Kevin Hayes, depending on where he ends. I think his contract would likely be similar to what Zibanejad already has in place, seeing as his stats last season were fairly comparable. August the 3rd will be an interesting day. We have Brock Nelson of the New York Islanders. We have Mark Stone of the Ottawa Senators. Obviously, Mark Stone's been a top forward for Ottawa. It's been rumored that the team and player are both interested in long-term deals, but obviously for that to come to be, they're going to have to get something in place before his hearing gets underway. But Mark Stone's been a terrific forward for Ottawa and certainly deserves a fairly significant raise as well. So he's certainly one of the more interesting cases to keep your eye on. The other player on August 3rd as well is Matthias Janmark. So August 3rd is 3 guys scheduled, so it could be a busy day depending on how the negotiations go with these players and their teams. Now the final day is August the 4th. On that day, we do have a few players scheduled at this point. We have Ryan Spooner, who's now a member of the New York Rangers after being traded from Boston last season. We have Patrick Nemeth of the Dallas Stars. And of course, we also have one of the more interesting cases and arguably the player of all these guys who had the best year last season, and that's Wild Bill Karlsson of the Vegas Golden Knights. Obviously, Karlsson had an awesome season, scoring 40-plus goals, really broke out, proved to be a top player in the league. But the only part that really makes this interesting is as much as he had an awesome season, teams don't usually like to overpay for 1 year. Obviously prior to that, he wasn't as much of an established NHLer and the stats were, significantly lower. So obviously some type of bridge deal would be the more likely scenario, I would think, with Karlsson and the Vegas Golden Knights, unless they can come to their own agreement. But obviously, a 1 or 2 year deal might actually work out to be best for him. If he can continue to play the way he has and have another 1 to 2 seasons at that top level, then he could certainly cash in on a longer term deal at that point in time, especially with the salary cap likely rising every year at least a little bit. Just kind of pushes up the amount he may be able to obtain in a new contract in a year or two's time. But at the same time, he probably would like that long-term security now, seeing as how his career got started. So tough to say where things end up with Wild Bill here, but I'm sure that Vegas would love to keep him in the lineup longer term. Just a matter of coming to terms on the right agreement. And you have to wonder for the player, what is really best here? Do you want to bet on yourself that you're going to continue that 40-plus goal type of play? But it could be risky. What if his stats dip a little bit? What if he gets injured? There's all those questions to keep in mind. That's where player agents come into play here and kind of offer the advice and try to work out the best deal for these guys. So should be a lot of interesting cases here for sure as these RFA hearings get started. Now, if you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams. There's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button as well. I'd really appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll catch you next time.